Hi everyone. I'm going to talk today about metaphor, help you with your assignment, distinguishing metaphor from objective representation. Um, so I want to talk about how metaphors work and why McGilchrist says that communication is basically always about metaphors. Even when we think we're exchanging information, um, about what's going on, what things are. In fact, we're communicating metaphors for how to perceive, how to evaluate what the facts are, and how to perceive what's going on. And in particular, I'm pursuing the question of what Ta-Nehisi Coates means by bodies, the key motif, what it means to be embodied, what he's talking about when he refers to the body. And that's really McGilchrist's concern as well. He's saying our normal analytical left brain communication about explicit information leaves out the experience of embodiment, what it means to be situated in a context, in a particular body, um, and I want to emphasize that also means in time. And there's, in these weeks, we're going to be looking particularly at how there's a gender and racial aspect to this, to embodiment. That is, the privilege of speaking from a non-embodied perspective, that of mere objectivity, mere facts, um, is exclusive privilege of white men, and the condition, it leaves out the condition of female bodies, racialized bodies, um, and not to mention queer bodies. So I should have said straight white men. I'm going to talk about how metaphors communicate about this condition of embodiment. Okay, so first I want to go back to McGilchrist's point about left brain, analytical thinking, and tool use. Remember, the brain is cross-wired with the body. Left brain tends to be kind of hardwired with right-handedness, and the sort of tool adaptation of the right hand. It's for um, accomplishing things, predation, consumption. Um, Now, humans tend to think that what distinguishes us among animals is our capacity for tool use, but that's really not correct. I mean, tool use is well documented among all kinds of animals, and in principle, animal bodies are all tools in some way, designed to uh, um, to adapt and succeed in the environment in one way or another. So I think a more precise way of talking about what, or according to McGilchrist, what distinguishes humans, Homo sapiens, what makes us unique is that we've made tool use the sole basis of our sense of time and experience in general. What we call temporal life, life, worldly life, to experience in time, experience of um, our worlds. So the experience of using tools we've kind of extrapolated that to explain how experience in general works, to the exclusion of this a different experience of time, the subjective temporality of environmental and social interaction, um, mood, emotion, and this is related to the different experience of time that we get from music, literature, dreams. So, what's this distinction? I'm kind of repeating some themes from McGilchrist here. So the objective clock time based on tool use represents a closed mechanism, a fixed formula, a repeatable formula or algorithm. So think of the saying, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Um, so I want you to think about how there's a kind of an experience of time that's related to this tool using perspective or attitude toward the world. That's the repetition of a kind of formula. I keep repeating this use of a tool, a certain formula, a certain mechanism, because it's successfully, brings me food or success in negotiating my environment. That is one, way of experiencing time that's crucial not just to human success as a species, but all sorts of different kinds of animals. But again, the issue that concerns McGilchrist and that I am suggesting is important to understanding the different way in which metaphors work is that we've forgotten there's a different experience of time that literature, music, and metaphors in particular communicate. That's the interactive, subjective time. It's responsive to context, responsive to surprises. I'm aware. I'm aware of my environment and thinking, vigilant to input that I don't know where it's coming from. So that's exactly the opposite of the tool using repetition. And I'm affected, and my attitude is updated according to input from the environment. So this is correlated with what Alison Gopnik talks about in terms of the experimental mode of learning of children, playfulness, what she talked about in terms of the Bayesian learning style of children that's always being updated in this interactive way. Tool use is about repetition in a mechanical way, trying to control the environment, find repeatable patterns in the environment, and subjective time is always interactive. It's not just about a subject-object relationship, but a reciprocal, back and forth kind of relationship. I think a great way of thinking about this is in terms of the distinction between a metronome and the experience of music itself. Metronome is just a mechanical representation of time at a certain number of beats per second or per minute. Whereas the experience of music is constitutively interactive. It's a phenomenal experience, a subjective experience of musical expression and reception. You could also talk about the difference between music on the page. It might have a certain, tempo, certain speed, objectively annotated, and the way it's actually performed. And the performance also always takes place in a particular context, um, a particular relationship between performer and audience. Um, uh, this being in the moment, this experience of particularity, um, is the different experience of time that I'm trying to get you to think about, and that a metaphor communicates. Um, Two things to that I want you to notice here. One is that metaphor communicates then by withholding information. It's more mysterious. It's more opaque. Whereas a metronome gives a complete representation of a mechanical, 60 beats per minute or whatever. The representation of what we get in a metaphor is mysterious and requires some kind of feedback from the audience. Likewise, in the experience of music, the performance is always playing. The performance of music, experience of rhythm, is always playing off the audience's expectation of uh, uh, of the rhythm. That's what syncopation is. It's not just completely predictable, but has a kind of unpredictable rhythm to it, and that's what makes music come alive, and it gives the particular liveness to musical communication. That's what I wanted to suggest when I played you the Jack White song, Love Interruption, how the mystery of all the metaphors he used there um, requires some subjective input by the audience. I have to imagine the scenarios that he's talking about. All the metaphors for love, putting a knife in your stomach, slamming your fingers in a door. These are not objective meanings, but they acquire their meaning by their mystery. And remember also the example from the little video clip about people taking pictures of the sun. The elderly lady talked about the example of a lover giving a rose. What makes that gesture romantic is the mystery of it, that it requires a mutual leap of faith by both parties. The other thing I want to say about this, though, that's really crucial to the point McGilchrist is making about the importance of metaphor, why we're always communicating, what we're really communicating and most powerfully communicating comes from metaphor rather than objective information. Studies have shown that if you ask people to try to keep time with a metronome, just like tap their finger, so a metronome's going 100 beats per minute, and just ask somebody to try to tap their finger in time with the metronome, totally predictable. You'd say that would be relatively easy. People are more precise, keep time more precisely if they're asked to keep time with each other rather than with a metronome. So you would think two people trying to keep time with each other, that introduces more subjectivity, more variability, unpredictability. But in fact, this people are more precise in synchronizing their subjective experience of rhythm they're more precise than they would be in just trying to synchronize with a machine. A machine is actually confusing to us compared to our experience of musical rhythm. So that's the kind of precision that gets communicated through metaphors that doesn't get communicated through, that's lacking in the communication of objective information. Objective information is actually vaguer um, and more ambiguous than metaphorical communication is, because metaphors situate us in actual human context. Um, uh, um, that is to say, the only kind of experience we ever have is actually being in a context. Remember, the facts are defined from what has been called the view from nowhere, the objective perspective that none of us ever actually inhabits. So, metaphors, music, the features of language that are exploited by literature, um, uh, are ways of acknowledging the embodiment, acknowledging the being situated in a body, um, the kind of thing, the kind of context that's ignored, suppressed, denied by the pretense to objectivity, the privilege of straight white male, uh, 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 pretense to transcend particular embodied perspectives. Um, so, just to give you examples of what I'm talking about, and what I think is a crucial aspect of what's going on in Coates's Between the World and Me, recent examples, relatively recent, the importance of uh, time to the critique of systemic racism in society. Looked last time at this opening image of Do the Right Thing, juxtaposing the mechanical clock um, and the organ of subjective perspective, the mouth, the embodied organ of speech that we hear appeal to us to wake up, appealing to in a situated experience of time. You need to wake up now. This juxtaposition. Um, Likewise, if you've seen The Watchmen, really powerful uh, use of time and the questioning of the official time of the calendar, questioning how the supposedly neutral time actually suppresses uh, hidden violence, a different, something that's been left out of official history is embedded in our normal experience of time. So I find this display at the Pike Place Market in Seattle really powerful use of the clock there. So again, that's what narrative poetry and music do. They tell us about bodies. They use temporal arts, storytelling, and music. Are creative, artistic uses of time, of our experience of time. When we hear a piece of music, it's always situated in a particular time, in a particular context. Likewise, when we read a story, or when we have a story read to us, That's organizing our time, organizing time in a particular way, of taking us out of the supposed, empty clock time, um, and into an expressive time of a particular story, a particular piece of music, and the arrangement of emotion, that the evocation of emotion that uh, um, music accomplishes, is also what is accomplished by in poetry by metaphors. It's asking us to reconstruct the analogies that are made in a metaphor, to arrange our bodies in a subjectively expressive way, expressive of emotion, and a critical questioning of normal time. I've mentioned before how this represents a chiasmus, an interdependence or dialectic of literature and history. Literature is always arranging the accidents of experience in a certain, giving it a kind of artistic coherence. And in turn, we need stories in order to have a frame for our experience of real life. Remember last time I was talking about the Kendrick Lamar song, but it ends with this emphasis on reality. Like I'm giving you reality. I'm framing reality. What's at stake is a kind of frame of reality that resists the violence and chaos of fighting and of the criminal justice system. In the Kendrick Lamar song we looked at, he's admonishing the people fighting in the crowd and saying, "Not on my time. That's a waste of time. That's a destruction of time." Likewise, he refers to the judge as making time so it ain't shit. So what he's talking about there is what I want to emphasize in quotes. A body, an embodied experience is getting sacrificed, dismissed, suppressed, violated, in a way he's drawing our attention to, and saying, music, metaphor, this metaphor of royalty, is a way of acknowledging, respecting the body, communicating about the body rather than violently suppressing it. To give us, to take a look at a sort of the broadest kind of perspective on this, I think might be helpful to look at the relationship between objective time and subjective time, and the violence that this can be at stake here. Look at this. This is a very important and totally uncontroversial. If you just Google this phrase, wages versus productivity over time since World War II. So this is just juxtaposing the difference between labor time, the amount of time worked, and the compensation. So the productivity of labor, how much is produced by the amount of time spent working versus the amount that's compensated. So this is, it's very clear. You can see across all these graphs show the same thing. So between the end of the Second World War, and early 1970s, productivity increased 96.7%, compensation increased basically in line with that increase in productivity. So that's to say that what people were actually doing, what people were actually producing, was getting socially recognized, was getting compensated um, in sync, in a kind of uh, in accordance, um, and this uh, synchronization of the increase in productivity, which largely has to do with the increase in technology and efficiency. Since the early 70s, productivity has continued to climb at the similar rate, but the compensation, the social recognition or social compensation, representation of the value of work, of time, has leveled off, hasn't increased in sync with the increase in productivity. And so what I want to point out there, I think, is the same. It's analogous to what Coates is talking about, which is that a certain kind of bodily experience of time is getting neglected, is going to waste, is getting disrespected, is getting deprived of social recognition and social value, denigrated over time. Now, we usually think about this in terms of, well, the increase in technology is, the corporations own the technology, so the workers don't deserve that. Don't deserve that compensation, but you can see how that's a violence implicit in that way of thinking. That turns the workers increasingly into mechanical drones, servicing the machines, disrespecting the bodies, disrespecting embodied time. So I think this is a helpful illustration of what's at stake in this idea of the body. So how do metaphors provide that social recognition of the body, what is officially neglected by the clock, the mechanism of industrial labor and compensation? William Blake, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the beginning of the kind of mechanization of social life that we it has only speeded up. That's what I was just looking at. That graph was the effect of technology, especially digital technology, on the organization of our time and compensation for our labor. So that Blake was one of the early critics of that, right, as the Industrial Revolution was getting started. So I'm going to look at two of his poems, The Fly and The Tiger. And in the Fly, he's, on the one hand, he's talking about experience that we've all had of just thoughtlessly swatting a fly, and killing an insect, and how we might think about that in our head. And he correlates that with the modern Cartesian abstraction that I've mentioned before, that a correlation of being with thinking. I think, therefore I am. What really counts is what we can rationally represent and calculate. Again, that's that prioritization of the abstract representation, abstract rationality and calculation over the embodied experience. And in this poem, he's looking at how we can sort of discount our own bodies in the same way we sort of thoughtlessly swat a fly. Um, Little fly, thy summer's play my thoughtless hand has brushed away. Am I not a fly like thee? Or art thou not a man like me? For I dance and drink and sing till some blind hand shall brush my wing. Um, he's saying, I'm gonna get, my body is just as dispensable as yours, little fly, because if I'm reasoning through, following consequentially from the Cartesian thinking, if I think therefore I am, if thought is life and strength and breath, and want of thought is death, then am I a happy fly if I live or if I die? Um, so he's thinking through and sort of realizing that actually my body doesn't matter. If all that matters is thinking, then my body is superfluous. And that's, I want to say, he's on to something, a systemic, kind of distorted perspective of the modern calculation of personal value and how we count bodies, what makes a body matter. So Blake uses the metaphor of the fly to show how we disregard bodies, how we don't just rationalize violence but against bodies, but disregard bodies altogether, fail to acknowledge that they even matter at all. That idea of mattering is, there's a really crucial pun in that term, that is to say, double entendre. To matter means to have meaning, but it also means to matter, like material, to be a body, to be a thing. So he shows how the kind of indifference to bodies turns death into a kind of game. Like he makes an analogous pun with the fly, the term the fly, to describe an actual being, sentient creature, and a badminton fly. That we sport with, and just that elision, that suppression of precisely what McGilchrist calls an I-thou relationship, a recognition of another creature, and turning it into an it. That's exactly also what Coates is talking about in terms of race, turning an I-thou relationship, a social relationship, into an I-it relationship. The tiger similarly talks about how we demonize other bodies. You might compare this to how we think about, the effect of words like thug. Cause us to turn other people into things unworthy of social recognition. And so in this poem, Blake, we see the perspective of the poet turning an I-thou relationship. He's looking at the tiger, at his fearful symmetry, that is to say, the symmetry of stripes surrounding the tiger's face as the poet faces him. Into horrifying, source of violence, and uses specifically. So if the fly refers to this Cartesian abstraction. Um, Abstract, rational, logical thinking shows the kind of lethality of this disembodied logic. The tiger shows a similar violence implicit in industrial mechanism, industrial machinery. So all the references to the furnace, the anvil, the hammer, and the chain. Um, this mechanism um, causes us to fail to see the actual tiger in front of us. So, and this is really pointedly underscored and turn the tiger into this horrific kind of demon and source of violence, terrifying. Um, this is underscored by the fact that he paints the tiger in profile here, not facing us. So we see that what the poet is addressing when he addresses the tiger isn't actually there. It's a figment of his own imagination. The tiger is other, different from the spectacle that the poet fears. And this is another way in which Blake playfully, he's showing us how we create a metaphor and the power of the metaphor to organize the reality around us. There's even like an X in the tigers. He's emphasizing that this is a cartoon, a projection of the speaker's mind, and the X in the tiger's eyes almost suggests like a doll. So like the badminton fly, Blake is showing how these make-believe figments of our imagination serve to disguise real social violence.